call to order, and by roll call, Gina Stino is not here. Mike Barclay,
Mike Barclay present.
Mark Cameron,
Mark Cameron here.
Fran Collins,
Yep.
Diane Kennedy. You're muted, Diane.
Sorry, I'm here.
Mark Maggie's not here. Mary McGoldrick,
Here.
Meg Wheeler,
Here.
and Rob Hillman. I am here. So, now my recollection is that we have taken votes on all of the articles on the warrant for town meeting. So, but perhaps a quick update on other boards' actions, or kind of what the state of the warrant is and what the state of town meeting is, from Chris. And then I want to touch on some policy documents that got circulated that we got asked to look at. So Chris, where are things at in the prep for town meeting world?
I was trying to sneak a piece of chocolate in.
Sorry about that. I have a knack for that sort of thing.
Excuse me if I have black teeth, it's chocolate. So, so the warrant is done, obviously, in everybody's houses. The motions as of today are now complete. There were some tweaks that had to be made to both of the zoning motions. There were some small tweaks that had to be made to the charts. So the motion will say that, and there'll be new charts attached to the motion packet. I think they're small, but like lodging house, should have said lodging room. There was a couple of small things. So just be safe that the tables have been reprinted from both of Article 13 and 14. That'll be in the packet. Capital meets tomorrow morning with a representative from the DOR, Department of Revenue, that I set up to talk about the special purpose stabilization funds. And they can also try to vote on the preliminary school preliminary assessment, building assessment. So on Monday, on Monday, the Capitol voted 3-2 to recommend the school stabilization fund, 3-2 to recommend the road stabilization fund, but voted 4-1 not to recommend the town hall. That said, I believe they're kind of reconsider that vote tomorrow at their meeting. So I don't know what that will turn into. I'm sorry if I seem to be a little lagged here. So,
what was the one they voted 4-1, 4-0 on?
No. It was 4-1 against. That was a town hall one, Fran.
Ooh.
That said, they're going to be. I walked through with the chair this evening a process to do a reconsideration. So apparently, one of the members wants to do a reconsideration. So we'll see what happens tomorrow.
Okay, Diane, you have a question?
No, no, I was just surprised because I think they took the vote this week, right? Monday.
It was Monday.
So there's and what's the process for reconsideration? Would it have to be somebody in the minority?
No, it's normally somebody on the majority side.
Correct, the majority side. Right.
Apparently wants to reconsider their vote.
Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I was watching the meeting. The motion was a negative motion. So the motion was to vote against town hall. So that's how the phrasing was. So that may make a difference in the whatever.
Yeah, I watched that vote too. I think it's why we vote in favor of things, because it's so easy. And given some of the things that were said in that capital budget meeting about the quality of our review, that may be how they think we vote all the time. It's an interesting listen. But yeah, I don't know. Do they have a posted agenda for that meeting, Chris? Can they do that? I hope they can.
Well, so that I walked through with their chair and council this evening how they would go about doing that. So they're all good. So they already had a posted agenda, so they just have to amend it. So they will be apparently at least entertaining a motion to reconsider that vote tomorrow at their 11 o'clock meeting. The first part of that meeting is to meet with the DOR, so it's public. If any of you want to
what the DOR, the Department of Revenue?
The Department of Revenue. So we have somebody from the Division of Local Services is going to be talking about how special purpose stabilization funds funded by a Prop 2.5 exclusion work. So if any of you want to watch it, you're welcome to. It's a public meeting at 11 o'clock. And it should be on the website, the link. Or you can just watch a recording of it afterwards.
Great.
So that was Monday, and that's going to be tomorrow. Tuesday, last night, the select board chose, after the CPC voted to reconsider their vote of the $1.3 million for the affordable housing component of the One Pleasant Street project. The select board decided not to pursue it any further at this time. So that's off the table now. And there was a consensus that both committees will continue to talk, but the select board wants to retain flexibility so that those 9 units, so it's 4 they're deeded, and the low and mod income 80% AMI, those other 9 can be more flexible to allow a different level of income. Like workforce housing is typically defined at 120% of median income. And there were conversations publicly about, what kind of town employees would even fit into it. And so there was, particularly if you suddenly have a spouse. And so again, so I think the key aspect that came out of it is flexibility, that the further restrictions can always be placed on these later. If everyone comes around and says, yes, this makes sense, we should make these should be more restrictive, or whatever format they want to have. So again, that 1.3 million is off. That will not be part of the motions on Monday. So it's just the 3 left in the CPC are the $2 million for the tennis courts and the Beechwood playground and the sports wall. Some money for historical cabinets at the library, and money for the preservation of existing units at the housing authority. So questions for me on that? We didn't decide. I mean, it didn't seem that it was necessary to re-vote because you all voted unanimously for all of them. So the fact that one came out, I don't think it was going to change anybody's vote. I mean, you can always move to reconsider tonight if you'd like, if you could figure out a way to do that. So the select board chose not to re-vote them because they were, they supported them all unanimously anyway, and it didn't matter on the other three. There's some
Fran, then Diane.
Fran?
Yeah, how did they vote on the recreation appropriations?
They support. CPC did vote to recommend that, if I recall, but they're not in the warrant per se on that. So,
but capital budget, how do they look at that?
They did. They voted to support that.
Okay, thank you.
At least I believe they did, if I recall correctly.
Diane.
I think Chris answered it, but did CPC revote that 1.3, or was that just the decision of the select board to pull it off?
No. CPC last week, CPC moved to reconsider because they had voted unanimously to support it, and they voted 6-2 to reconsider, and then they withdrew their recommendation. And they asked the select board for further input. They said, we'd like you to see if you can bump up the amount of locked-in affordable units here.
Right.
And again, remember, CPC can only fund 100% of AMI or less. And workforce housing is 120. In fact, Duxbury just did a project at 160%. Provincetown has affordable units at 200% of AMI. Wow. So, there's flexibility depending on the local area.
Right. But those aren't eligible for CPC funding.
Correct. Over 100%. So, and while the conversation said, well, maybe in the spring we'll come around and decide that makes sense, but right now we don't want to lock in and not be able to come back out of it. We can always, the conversation was, you can always deed them. You can always, down the road, either it's in the spring or in the fall or whenever, you can always deed them later. But to take them back out of deed is really not practical if they've been restricted. So that's where that is. And I'm also, by the way, I have I'm trying to make sure I'm hitting all of you on the call here. I have a worked up kind of it's not a P&L for the apartment units that's been freshened and freshened. So I'm going to send that off to you momentarily so you have it. I think I have all. I think I have it all with you. No, I don't have Mark. So that remains a work in progress. There was another. The town has been talking to Wynn Properties. Wynn Properties, I think, is the largest and one of the largest managers of affordable housing units in the country. Their chairman happens to live in Cohasset, and he arranged for a conversation after he actually applauded the town for considering doing this in the first place. The town had several folks had a conversation with their executive vice president today, who answered a bunch more questions. So Michelle was documenting all of that up too. So so I'm actually now sending to you all of you this mock-up of the current, like what the rents would be like, what the vacant and the insurance, all it's fairly up to date now. So the numbers are good. And one of the things, by the way, that we learned from these conversations about is that there's apparently a very low vacancy rate for units that are considered affordable because they're hard to find. So if somebody gets them and they can stay qualified for them, they don't go anywhere because they're hard to find. And when people get them, they tend to stay. So long as they qualify. So we were told the vacancy rate's actually lower than units that are considered. And again, I'm using the word affordable in its very broadest, most fungible sense, right? Because there's state terminology for what that means. So what we are is everyone's pretty much voted on everything except the capital budget has not voted on the feasibility study yet, which I think they're going to do tomorrow.
Okay. Excuse me. Thank you. The second item on our agenda was sort of a swap out item. We had agended some time for further discussion of the zoning bylaws if that were necessary, and proved not to be necessary. So I had been provided with a draft of proposed policies for the special stabilization funds that are on the warrant. These are policies that were generated after the proposals were coming together as warrant items. Various committees thought that seeing draft policies ahead of time, and I think that Diane had mentioned it in this committee. And these, the versions that I sent you were the ones that I received. The underlying documents were vetted by town council. I watched, I'll confess, portions of a lengthy meeting of capital budget where they went through them in tremendous detail. The underlying logic of them remains the same, which I'm glad of because I think I wrote the first draft. But I sent them, I circulated them, and you should have gotten them in the second pack of material. At a high level, they direct, how the funds are accrued, how they're maintained, what they're permitted to be expended upon, and the mechanics of that expense. I didn't know whether anybody had any questions or comments on either. There's a separate policy for the school capital fund and a separate one for the roads and sidewalks fund. I didn't reserve time to sort of fly spec them particularly because they've been pretty heavily vetted and they seem to get the job done. But I'm happy to invite conversation points, suggestions we could push back up. I mean, at the end of the day, there are policies that are adopted by, I say this subject being corrected by either Diane or Chris, that are adopted by the select board and can be tweaked by them as these funds have are begin to be experienced in real time should they pass. But they're an expression of what the understanding is about the governance of these funds at the time they are instituted. I mean, think of them as the Federalist Papers for special stabilization funds. Well, no, because that then makes me into Thomas Jefferson or Alexander Hamilton. I don't sing that well, so we're going to let that analogy die a quiet death.
No, I was going to jump in and start singing, Rob. Come on, you're stealing my thunder.
So I'm like I said, we can pass thoughts up the chain if we'd like, and I'm happy for them. I'm not trying to get around a robust discussion about this. So I see Mike's hand. That's always a good sign. What do you got?
I don't know if it's a good sign or not. Yeah, I mean, obviously I've read through these. I've heard various discussions on it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any document like this is going to be able to contemplate every possible future scenario. So I don't expect this to do that either. Just out of curiosity, though, Rob, in the final bullet point that Matt references Chapter 29, Section 21CG, just around, the appropriations part of that. Just curious, like, is that just, obviously that's a state statute that empowers the select board to, manage these in the future, kind of as a reasonable person would, I guess.
That looks an awful lot like something that was plugged in by town council, and it probably should have been plugged in by me in the first instance. But it's a reference to the that these policies don't derogate from any authority granted by statute. So it seems to me it's the sort of prudent language you put into things to take away any into a policy to make sure that it says on its face that it comports with law.
And I mean, there are other towns in the Commonwealth that have established these. So, I haven't had the chance to go search for any of them, but I'm guessing that this is pretty much boilerplate with what other towns that have passed these stabilization funds have written into their, their bylaws or whatever.
I expect so, not in the least part that our town council is the firm that represents something like 141 towns in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So they tend to, and I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but they tend to create the boilerplate that gets used from place to place. And I know that they vetted these, and commented on them. So I think you're quite right. Diane.
Here I go with my word parsing, and I'm not a lawyer, so bear with me on at least on the roads and sidewalk stabilization fund. It says the target funding for roads and sidewalk capital stabilization fund shall be $800,000. I just wonder if the word annual should be in there or if it's intentionally not there, because I think my understanding is that this is something that annually we would like to be adding to the road and stabilization fund. So it's not just a one-time thing. The school stabilization fund, that similar bullet reads a little differently. It says, as of fiscal year 2024, the target funding for the school capital stabilization fund shall be $1.5 million, which just hints a little more like it's as of this point, and it may change going forward. So I don't know, I read it a little differently, but I just wonder if the word annual should be there.
I am led to believe that the select board is going to take a further look at these, and I think that is actually one of the things that has been noticed by others.
Okay,
but I'll pass that comment along. I see your point. It may well be, if it's a drafter's error, it's probably mine. And it may have been in contemplation of the notion that we're looking to create a fund that would pick up the what is projected out, at least for a period of time, as the annual expense associated with, paving a 20th of the streets every year, et cetera. But I'll pass that comment along.
And just a little follow-up, just in reading the actual ballot question, the two questions that are actually overrides, the question 3 and 4 for the stabilization funds, which are, perceived or at least anticipated to be annual additional tax assessments. I don't know. I mean, it's too late on these. I get it, but it reads, shall the town of Cohasset be allowed to assess an additional blah, 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 for the purposes of funding the school stabilization fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2023. Don't read that as a for, you know, kind of in perpetuity, if you will. So I do think, to the extent that we can clarify for voters that this is something that is anticipated to be an annual additional assessment, that would be good. The ballot's a done deal, and there's no way to clarify that anymore. But I read it as, the way it reads, it sounds like it's just for that fiscal year, as opposed to something that's going to be added to the tax levy going forward.
Chris, I saw your hand go up. I
just want to, yeah, if the select board caught the same thing, Diane, in a policy, capital seemed to have wanted to take it out, and they're putting it back in. So if you folks think it also should be back in, that would be helpful. The ballot question, by the way, that's just the way that's the way the state wants the ballot questions to be listed, because there's only ever one vote publicly, and then the select board continues the fund, or whatever the governing executive body is in the community, continues it annually if it by public decision,
right, or not.
Correct.
Or not. Question 1 or 2, which specifically references Prop 2.5, and aren't overrides, but they're debt exclusions, because there is a set period of time. It goes on and on until the debt's paid off. Okay, that makes sense to me.
The stabilization funds are kind of a hybrid of those, I guess. Yeah. They're dedicated to a special purpose, and they live as long as the community thinks it's needed. That special purpose is still needed. So they're kind of a hybrid, I guess. They've been used. They haven't used a lot. But they're being used more, I think, because they fit an interesting niche.
So I think it might be helpful to the process if we were, I mean, we're not recommending to town meeting that they adopt these policies, because town meeting is adopting these policies. But if we perhaps move to express to the select board our approval of these policies in the form that we anticipate them winding up. Does that work for everybody? Something along those lines?
And do you agree that we should, ask them to wordsmith it to clarify, the annual portion of this? To Chris's point, it sounds like they're thinking of doing that anyway. And Chris, did I misunderstand that you thought it would be helpful if we kind of also said that? He's eating chocolate.
No, I was dealing with the dog. Yes, it would be helpful. It would be helpful.
Okay, then Diane, do you want to frame a motion? I agree with you. I think if we have something to add, we should add it. Or do we want to say we, recommend these subject to additional comments, or wording issues from, comments from that we could send along as an addendum? What's your preference?
I think that's fine. Just that we had a discussion, assuming this is a discussion. If anybody has anything to say about it, that on the whole, these look good. With the recommendation that they because they are the policy makers, they have a discussion on whether the word annual or something along those lines be added. So that's not much of a motion, but I'll move it.
When I try this, move that if somebody wants to make this motion, move that the advisory committee recommends that the select board adopt the special purpose stabilization funds policies in the form considered by the advisory committee on November 8th. And in so doing, consider the use of the term, quote, annual, end quote, in the roads and sidewalks fund as discussed at our meeting.
In terms of target funding. So moved.
Second.
Okay. Motion and a second. Further conversation? Hearing none. Gina Stino. Got to unmute, Gene.
Sorry about that. Gina Stino, aye.
So Mike Barclay.
Mike Barclay, aye.
Mark Cameron.
Mark Cameron, aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Diane Kennedy.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Mary McGoldrick.
Mary McGoldrick, aye.
Meg Wheeler.
Meg Wheeler, aye.
And Robin and I too am an aye. Great. We've done our duty with respect to the policies. The next item on our agenda has to do with presentations at special town meeting. Before every town meeting, there's a discussion, a little bit of a negotiation, including the moderator, the chair of the select board, chair of advisory, town council, Chris, and sometimes others, concerning the articles and presentations. It just reminds me every 6 months how good a town moderator we have, and his dedication to having a full and fair meeting that is at the same time efficient. So he encourages comments from boards that are succinct and limited to key items of high importance. And sometimes that's only the budget and maybe a zoning article, but this town meeting, and even he recognizes is unusual. And we talked about which articles, and I had asked in our last meeting for volunteers for any particular articles. And there's sort of kind of a two-part plan. One is, as to the 4 major spending articles, we will have a member of our committee speak briefly to the meeting saying the advisory committee recommended this article because, and then brief summary of our reasoning. And that's that's consistent with our job as literally the advisory committee. As to some of the other articles, I think we should, if debate gets to a place where perhaps somebody should remind the meeting that advisory favored this and why, we may want to have people prepared to do so or volunteer to do so. But out of deference to Dan's approach to keeping the meeting streamlined, not have somebody go up at the beginning to just state the obvious, the thing that's printed in your warrant that said this was recommended. In response to my call for volunteers, we had a robust response. And as to the police and fire, Mike Barclay volunteered, and he had been liaison to those departments for a number of budget cycles now. So that struck me as thanks. And on town hall, Mark Maggi volunteered, and I think for a variety of reasons he will do a very good job expressing our collective view on those points. And I think Mark is not one of the usual suspects. I think it's the first time he would be presenting at town meeting, and he asked, and I was happy that he did. As to the schools fund, perhaps in an act of stereotyping, I thought one of our 2 members with substantial experience on the school committee would have been the sensible candidate. I don't know whether Mary and Jean flipped a coin or Jean drew the short straw, or
Maybe
what.
that.
But Jean will present on that. As to the roads fund, that's still an open slot, although it's one I'm willing to fill unless anyone else has any interest in doing so. I have a pretty decent understanding how these stabilization funds are set up and what they're supposed to do. But I'd be happy to cede that to anyone else. So, it's not a vote thing, but is everybody comfortable with that? Is there anything that anyone would like to do? I should, before I kind of open it up for any conversation, well, if any, this does not, as I'm sure all of you know, prevent any of us from speaking in our individual capacities on anything. And, so this is just the brief presentation of the advisory board recommended, and here's why. Questions, comments? Mike?
Yeah, Rob, just back to the one I emailed you about where I was on a plane the night the public safety facility was voted on. So my vote, it's 8-0 in the warrant, should be 9-0, but I was unavailable at the time. So I just want to make sure that in representing the committee, there's nothing astray, that I wasn't actually voting at that time.
No, not at all. You're a member of you're a member of the committee, and you can speak for the committee if you want to look over we live in a world where you can go back and relive the meeting through the beauty of YouTube, but you know what the points are and the minutes or what have you. But I don't think that's a problem at all. You remember the meeting for the committee where you happen to be that evening. I don't think it's material. Thanks for asking, but I don't think it's material. Anything else? Okay. Like I said, we do not hang our First Amendment and other rights at the door on our way in. So, once the conversation gets going, any of us can speak to any of these matters that we would like. I am not anticipating any substantial broad brush debate concerning zoning. If there's granular disputes over that somebody comes off the floor with some unanticipated issue with one of the provisions of the zoning changes, there are people in the room who know this, have spent a lot more time very much in the trenches about it. One of us, could be me, could, if it's getting a little out of if it's going off the rails a little bit, perhaps remind town meeting that that advisory has recommended this as part of the changes that are proposed to town meeting in these articles are a result of looking at the biggest picture, which is a wildly overdue, very comprehensive overhaul of our entire zoning bylaw. And if there are small issues or tweaks or cleanups, these things can be made at future town meetings. There is no, I would hate to see what happened a couple of town meetings ago where a whole set of proposed changes went out the window because a couple of them became controversial. But that said, I don't really, unless somebody's wants to jump in the trenches and stay in that last ditch on zoning, in which case I will happily let you do so. I think that's the strategy as to those articles. Anybody have any other thoughts? I'll say this also just for planning purposes. Dan is, and everyone else in the meeting is hopeful, dare I say optimistic, about getting this town meeting up and down in one evening. If it can't be, and I would think that it really only would be a circumstance generated by the lack of a quorum and somebody being sufficiently gauche to do a quorum call, because the law says you have 100 people in the room until somebody counts. So it's there is a possibility that if there's no quorum or it just becomes absurdly late, as some of us may remember happening once or twice, Tuesday night. So we hope not, but that, I should tell you, is the working plan. The town has the gymnasium reserved for Tuesday night, and that is the moderator's contingency plan. But that's subject to getting a quorum. So you know, I think the childcare goes until about 10. I don't know all the details, but hopefully, yeah, I think that we can count on Dan to kind of let the meeting know what the stakes are, and hopefully that will make people make their comments relevant, non-cumulative, and et cetera, et cetera. So that brings us to our next agenda item, which I had circulated as I thought I circulated. Did I send you an email attaching prior drafts of the
Budget messages.
budget messages? I did. Okay. I usually put all my documents for this meeting into a particular electronic file, and did I do that this time? Well, evidently not, so I apologize. I'll try not to delay much. I mean, the question with the budget message is, it's clearly something we ordinarily would have done by now, but it's also something that's going to be affected by several of the articles at the upcoming town meeting. I think the best approach to a budget message is we all have the base materials. We're all going to go through this town meeting. We make it the number one item at our first meeting post town meeting. I know, Diane has been on the receiving end of the budget message a bunch of times, so you may have some thoughts about this, and I'd like to hear them, but certainly anyone else as well.
I was going to say exactly that, Rob. I think, we're going to, just reviewing the ones we've had in the past. I mean, it really is to frame the preparation for the FY25 budget for the staff. And I think until we know whether we're going to have two special stabilization funds and two debt exclusions, it's really hard to say, to make comments on reserve funds or capital investments, because it's all going to be dependent on the results of actually the ballot question in 2 weeks. So I agree with you.
Okay. I think that maybe it might make sense when we do schedule that meeting, to maybe have a draft. Maybe I'll take a schwack at a draft and pass it around. We can't serially deliberate, but Mary, and given your prior position, Diane, maybe you could take a look at it as a template so that when we sit down to talk, we can have our points in a row. There are some, like the reserve fund policy. It's become a tradition, leaving out cookies for Santa Claus every Christmas Eve kind of tradition of referencing the reserve fund in our budget message, and then not ever addressing the reserve fund for the rest of the year, in terms of the policy. So we should either, make a decision and really kind of work with the other boards to revise that, or just drop it. The reserve fund, we aren't at the level that is recommended by our policy, if I recall correctly, but we now, I'm through 5 years on advisory, we've rarely dipped into it. So what we need in the reserve fund, and the reserve fund and its purposes are set by statute. So that has to be an unanticipated expense of a certain kind, and it's useful to have. I mean, the Commonwealth wouldn't require it if you didn't, but I think part of it is we've been lucky to avoid unanticipated major expenses, but also some of those have been, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of them have been addressed by cash available in the budget. Or from other sources. So that's kind of where I'm thinking. Diane?
Yeah, just correct me if I've missed it, but the most recent budget message I have that you shared with us, Rob, is the FY23, as opposed to FY24.
That might have been that may have been, and by may have been, I mean almost certainly was an error by me. So I'll circulate that.
Yeah, and because the advisory message is really good, but it really should be looked at in context of what the budget messages are actually reading.
Yeah, I sent the wrong one.
Yep. Okay, great.
I got the
24.
24.
No, actually strike that. I misstated. It is the FY24 budget message.
Yeah.
It's misnamed. So it is the right message. It's got the wrong nomenclature, I think.
You dated it September 21st, 2022. So that's the problem.
Well, it was. I mean, that's the appropriate, because it was for the budget beginning June 30, 2023. I just named the document was FY23 advisory. It should have been FY24, which it is in the Ray line, the subject line. So
yeah,
okay, I think I'm looking at the wrong email. So my apologies.
Yeah, but it was, financial management policies, reserve policy, free cash balance, defining long-term capital needs, maintenance, the shortage created in the capital stabilization fund by funding it at a fixed amount for 10 years, which decreases its buying power year over year. Those, 9 paragraphs on those 5 issues are typically what we've dealt with, but I'll make sure that I resend things and it's clear what they are and we can think through them, but also think of other things that we might want in our budget message. I thought I saw the select boards one included a parade, but I may have misread that. So, and then there's the select board's budget priorities, which, may be our priorities too. But I would, given that this will be the last budget message I deal with, at least for this go around with advisory, to make a decision as to what to do about our reserve fund request. Either just ask for the bylaw to be amended to reflect reality, or, I don't know that we're going to find extra money in the budget to push into it, given that it's a contingency fund. But I don't know whether our new members are, it's like, we actually have one real superpower. The gatekeeper to the reserve fund is the advisory committee. We get to decide whether to release it or not. So we've got a few bucks to deal with emergencies. It's fun to have something that's actually ours to do. But like I said, the best thing about it is we rarely are called upon to do so. I think we were going to do did we actually spend reserve fund money on the elevator failure last time around, Chris?
Pretty sure.
I think we did, because there's a potential for an oil release and we wanted to make that not happen. So
yeah, you approved it, and we were able to fund it all the alternative way. But yes, it's for those kinds of things. It's for these unexpected,
Yeah, we slapped a coat of paint on the front of town hall for the Cohasset 250. That was a reserve fund transfer. The less said about the better, unfortunately. So I think that is where we're at with the budget message. We have a couple of sets of minutes to approve, which I hope I sent around effectively. They would have been the minutes, and again, correct me if I'm wrong. I know the minutes from the 25th, but also I think we had not yet approved the minutes from the 11th, unless our unless Leontina has other thoughts about this, and I know she is in the wings on our call. Well, hearing nothing, let me suggest that we look at the minutes of the October 11 meeting of the advisory committee. Take a second to review them. Does anybody have any comments? Mike?
It might be nitpicky, but I'm just looking at the in the top of the minutes, the review of articles for special town meeting, progress by other committees. In the first paragraph, second line, where it refers to the stabilization funds as schools and streets and sidewalks, I think it's titled roads and sidewalks.
It is.
So I don't know, nitpicky, but
hey, 253 years from now, when people are looking at town records, they're going to look at our minutes and say, what's that all about? So, all right, then I hear Mike asking that streets be changed to roads, and we'll take that as an informal, friendly motion to amend. With that amendment, does somebody want to move these minutes?
So moved.
Jean, a second.
Second.
Mary, any further discussion? All in favor of accepting the minutes of the October 11, 2023 meeting of the advisory committee as amended as discussed, please signify by saying aye. Gina Stino.
Gina Stino, aye.
Mike Barclay.
Mike Barclay, aye.
Mark Cameron.
Mark Cameron, aye.
Fran Collins.
Fran, aye.
Diane Kennedy.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Mary McGoldrick.
Mary McGoldrick, aye.
Meg Wheeler.
Meg Wheeler, aye.
And Rob Hillman, I too am an aye, which brings us to the minutes of the 25th. Take a moment to look those over. The zoning. Zoning, budget message. Very good. Any discussion? Does somebody want to move that we accept these minutes?
I'll move it.
Gina Stino, a second.
Second.
Mary McGoldrick, further discussion? Roll call vote. Gina Stino.
Gina Stino, aye.
Mike Barclay.
Mike Barclay, aye.
Mark Cameron.
Mark Cameron, aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Diane Kennedy.
Diane Kennedy's going to abstain. I was not there.
Mary McGoldrick.
Aye.
Meg Wheeler.
Meg Wheeler also abstains. I was not present.
That's right. And Rob Hillman, I was there. I vote aye. Okay. So that brings us to topics of upcoming meetings is we have a meeting noticed for 6:30 on Monday night with a very general agenda item. We'll only convene that meeting if we think we need to. And if something is absolutely going to be, need our attention, I'll email everybody, Monday by early in the day. I don't anticipate anything. It's just there's a placeholder. Fran?
I can speak to roads and sidewalks if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. That'd be great. I have some thoughts about it. We should, in an open meeting law compliant way, talk about those. I'll make
Good.
sure. So like I said, I mean, you know, I don't think there's any need to plan to be there at 6:30 unless I say it's really important for you to be here at 6:30. So look at your email at about, you know, I don't know, 5 o'clock, see where you're at, or see where we're at. Anything else about, and then we'll have to schedule a meeting for after town meeting as well. Mary?
Just a question, is it breaking any open meeting laws? If we're not able to tune into the capital budget meeting tomorrow, just to have a sense of if they revoted anything or how they voted on any outstanding items?
I think the fact of their votes can be distributed to the members of the committee without comment or deliberation.
Okay, that might just be useful, especially if we're not gathering specifically before the town meeting begins.
I think that's good. Chris, is that consistent with your notions of OML? I mean,
Yeah, we can just share information. That's not a problem, as long as you don't comment amongst yourselves.
Yeah, it's just a matter.
It's probably never a bad idea though to post a short meeting beforehand just in case you need it.
I have it posted
Okay.
for 6:30. So, you know, maybe, you know, once a quorum of people, you know, I mean, think about getting there by 1:15, and if there's some heinous emergency that comes up at the last minute, we'll open a meeting and do what we have to do, if we have to do anything. I'm hoping not, but you know, it's happened before, and in a whole variety of ways. Not by us, by other committees. So that, I mean, do we want to look at a calendar for a post meeting, a post town meeting date? Because we run into Thanksgiving really early this year. I think Thanksgiving's the 23rd. So the Wednesday after town meeting, after the week of town meeting is literally the day before Thanksgiving. I'm guessing no. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I'm guessing probably not. Do you want to put one on the books for the following Wednesday?
29th?
Yeah.
I am not available, but that is okay.
Never okay, but we'll muddle through. All right, why don't we put it on for then, and we'll go from there. So, topics not reasonably anticipated. I did not reasonably anticipate anything.
Rob, Chris has a question.
I just want to pass one more piece of information. So all of you, just a reminder that the annual thank you to the board and committee members is a week from town meeting. It's the November 20th in the evening at 6 p.m. at Wilkett Commons. We'd appreciate if you RSVP'd so poor Maria won't have a stroke about making sure there's enough snacks. We're putting out some nice desserts from Mrs. Meckler's Mercantile.
Oh, nice.
And another place that has a funky name that I can't remember that makes little desserts somewhere in the area. They're just supposed to be excellent. So there'll be nice little desserty things and coffee and tea and water. So again, it's an informal, just kind of just a thank you night. So if any of you can come, please just let Maria know that. Feel free to bring your spouse or anyone else that wants to hang out for a little bit. Some of you actually have spouses that are already committee members. So there you go. So you're all set. And again, that's 6 p.m. Monday the 20th at Wilkett Commons.
Good. Okay. Then I look forward to seeing you all on Monday. And there's one more motion. Does anybody want to move it?
Motion to adjourn.
All at once.
Thanks.
Mark Cameron, do I have a second?
Second.
I'll give that Mary for that
Mary.
one. That's never a motion that's going to die for one of a second. Roll call vote. Gina Stino.
Gina Stino, aye.
Mike Barclay.
Mike Barclay, aye.
Mark Cameron.
Mark Cameron, aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Diane Kennedy.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Mary McGoldrick, aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Meg Wheeler, I.
and Meg Wheeler's dog. Heather.
Definitely an I. She's
I've
ready.
been watching that around the corner between the dog and Diane's cat. This is always a fun meeting. And I too am an I, so we stand adjourned. Have a good night, have a good weekend, and let's have a good thought for a productive meeting on Monday. So